I wouldn't mind at this point if Caitlyn just started her villain arc. She needs to start putting her foot down because some of this stuff is getting a little wild. She comes into the WNBA, her biggest life dream to play professional basketball. She comes into the WNBA. She gets a special whistle the opposite way because she's getting fouled and flagrant fouled, and just the defense that they're playing on her is actually insane. Yet despite all that, has an incredible rookie season. And then on top of that, people are using her name for their hidden agendas on both sides. People are just using Caitlyn's name, and then if she says something, it's not enough. If she doesn't say anything, she never wants to speak out about anything. She
can't win. That statement is often used when talking about Caitlyn Clark. They may be right in a sense, since there will always be someone who wants to ruin her, regardless of what she does. Don't say anything because she is too passive. Speak out because she's causing drama. Every move she makes garners media attention. Every comment she makes sparks a conversation. But recently, something has changed. After months of being mute and letting the noise swirl around her, Caitlyn Clark finally realized she had had enough. She didn't hold back when she spoke either. There was more to her comments than a sound clip from an interview. They sent a message. A statement addressed specifically to WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert. This isn't your typical sports dispute. It has nothing to do with a bad choice or a controversial post-game statement. It has to do with power, influence, and control. For years, the WNBA has been in desperate need of a breakout star. Someone who could draw crowds, sell out venues, and garner international attention. Caitlyn Clark possesses that as well. But what if she starts to be seen as a threat by the very institution that produced her? What happens when the biggest star in the league decides she's had enough politeness? Everything was completely turned upside down at this time. When the face of women's basketball drew a line in the sand with purposeful accuracy instead of anger or outrage. Because the league has been using her name to boost ticket sales and viewership, a storm has been gathering behind the scenes. And the storm is here. If you've been watching from the outside, it can seem like just another headline in a busy news cycle. Don't get me wrong, though, this isn't about a single commissioner or player. It concerns who truly runs the WNBA and what happens when the most powerful voice in the sport chooses to speak up. The spark wasn't started by Caitlyn Clark. You probably didn't anticipate it. In addition to being an all-star and a renowned veteran, Nafi Sakalier is the vice president of the WNBA Players Association. She doesn't try to make headlines. She does not speak incoherently. During what was meant to be a calm farewell interview at the end of the season, she made a startling admission that caused the entire basketball world to halt. In just 6 minutes, Keir set off a chain reaction that the league is currently trying to contain. She claimed that in a private conversation, Commissioner Cathy Engelbert told her something that stunned everyone. According to Keir, Engelbert stated that Caitlyn Clark should be grateful to the WNBA because without the league's platform, she wouldn't have all those lucrative endorsement deals. Think about that. The player was told she should be grateful for breaking watching records, packing arenas from coast to coast, and introducing millions of new fans to women's basketball on her own. The same athlete whose name enabled the league to reach previously unimaginable levels of social media attention, ticket sales, and sponsorships. The insinuation was like a punch to the stomach, and many were furious. In just a few hours, social media took off. Hashtags started to become more and more common. Memes were flying, and fans from all across the sports world were demanding answers. Grateful to whom? They asked. Because it seemed the league should be grateful for her. Players began reacting as well. While some made subtle posts that showed they understood more than they were communicating, others employed enigmatic emojis. An internal inferno abruptly overshadowed the finals, which should have been the WNBA's greatest moment. But this is what made this disagreement unique. Nafi Sakalier is more than just an athlete venting her frustration following a challenging season. She actively participates in the next collective bargaining agreement, travel conditions, and player contracts as a union leader. When someone with that level of authority openly disparages the commissioner, it's not gossip. It acts as a cautionary tale. The commissioner knew this because a few days later, Cathy Engelbert was on the platform trying to put out the fire. Her subsequent remarks, meanwhile, failed to diffuse the tension. It sprayed petrol all over everything. When a storm hit, Cathy Engelbert did what all seasoned executives are trained to do: take control of the narrative by taking the microphone. Everyone waited to hear the commissioner's response to Nfisa Collier's shocking claim as reporters swarmed to the press room and cameras rolled. But rather than easing the tension, Engelbert's comments just made it worse. With that polished business manner and a tight smile, she denied everything. "Obviously, I didn't say those things," she answered. Her well-practiced, calm, and measured voice was meant to project authority. She described Caitlin Clark as a transformational player, praised her impact, and conveyed the league's satisfaction in her achievements. On paper, it sounded like damage control. There was an issue in between the lines, though. Because even though Engelbert publicly praised Caitlin, she took measures to refute Keir's account. She also stepped beyond a boundary that is challenging to cross again. She did more than just deny the story. She discredited a player who symbolizes all women in that league. Standing at a platform on national television, she effectively accused the vice president of the Players Association of lying. There isn't a misunderstanding. The internet quickly did what it always does, analyzing every pause, every word, and every second. Fans took note of Engelbert's avoidance of direct questions, her focus shifting to celebrating the finals, and her failure to provide an explanation for Nafis's first fabrication of such a precise claim. It's a war declaration, and it was palpable to all onlookers. There was a thick air in the room, the stress was intense, and reporters did not immediately retaliate. It was the kind of response that highlights an issue instead of fixing it. And that's exactly what happened next. Because instead of mending the little trust that existed between the players and the league office, Engelbert's denial broke it. Behind the scenes, frustration exploded. Players started expressing themselves through interviews, podcasts, and subtle yet powerful posts that made their feelings extremely clear rather than through official remarks or press releases. The leadership of the league officially lost the locker room. That was only the beginning, though, as players didn't hold back when they started speaking up. Moreover, their later comments went beyond merely denouncing the commissioner. It illustrated the depth of the structural flaws in the WNBA. After the commissioner's news conference, there was a brief period of stillness. The players, who make up the league's nucleus, started expressing their sentiments in a matter of hours, but not via official statements or tweets that were approved by PR. They were frank, honest, and irritated in their speech. It was not just what they said, it was also how they said it. The tone was different this time. "I'm done acting, tired, and angry." One player articulated what many had been thinking for months. "Every time she talks, the same thing happens to us. No one cares." Brutal honesty devoid of any pretense or code words. And that one clip captured everything the players had been trying to hide. They are tired of leaders who talk about progress but don't put it into practice. "I'm tired of hearing that we value our players every time something goes wrong. When decisions are made behind closed doors, they are tired of having to smile for the cameras." It was clear at that time that the players didn't feel in control of anything, despite the WNBA's long-standing promotion as a player-driven league. Moreover, the intensity of this reaction was not due to the anger itself. It was the unity. For once, both stars and role players, newcomers and seasoned professionals, were echoing the message. "It's sufficient." Standing in the center of it all, passively observing, was Caitlin Clark, the lightning rod for months. She was mysteriously brought back by every controversial foul, every conversation about privilege or favoritism, and every headline. Throughout, she remained composed, professional, and focused. She declined to take sides, refusing to stoke a fight that was already raging. Silence, however, has a limited influence. Especially if your name is regularly brought up in disputes that you did not start. Especially in view of the commissioner's purported use of you as an example in a private discussion that is currently raising controversy inside the league. Teams were being chosen by the players. Supporters were taking sides. It was unbearably stressful. And there was one thing that everyone was curious about. What role did Caitlin Clark play? Because if she spoke, everything would be different. For months, Caitlin Clark said nothing. And being quiet wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a strategy. Her life is about to enter its most scrutinized phase. Every word she said was scrutinized by fans, pundits, and even her own classmates. She quickly learned that every remark might be used against someone in this league. That's why she kept her head down. She played, competed, and listened to the noise. Despite absorbing hits on the floor that would have led to an NBA expulsion, she never started, and her moniker became controversial. Despite her achievement being utilized as a talking point about attention, affluence, and favoritism, she said nothing. She used her game to speak. And for a while, that worked. Because in a league that desperately needed to grow, Caitlin Clark's presence was a gold rush. Every arena she visited was completely booked. Every telecast broke ratings records. Every time she played, the WNBA was able to reach a new audience. The silence had its limits because no matter how much she focused on basketball, the politics of the league kept pulling her name back into the spotlight. When one of the most prominent participants in the game, Nfisakir, made her accusation against the commissioner public, Caitlin could not help but get involved. When reporters asked her about it, the room became silent. It was tangible. The stress, the anxiety, and the expectation. Everyone was interested. Would she defend the league that shaped her or the athletes who fought for her respect? At that moment, Caitlin Clark took a rare action. She stopped being cautious. First of all, she said in a calm, collected tone, "I have the utmost respect for Fee. She didn't duck, and I think she made some excellent arguments. She didn't look back. She refrained from employing the vague diplomatic expression that famous people usually employ. She looked directly into the cameras and offered Nfisakir her complete support. She then added the crucial line. People need to understand that great leadership is needed at every level. We need to make the most of this pivotal moment in the league's history." That was all. The WNBA's power dynamics completely changed in a single line because, let's be clear, that wasn't a casual remark. That was an accurate and well-written statement. It transcended both Nfisa's claim and Engelbert's denial. It has to do with something deeper. Implication rather than by name, Caitlin Clark was criticizing leadership in general. When she said, "We need great leadership," everyone knew exactly who she meant. Caitlin Clark is more than just a participant, which is why it was so crucial. She is the expansion strategy for the WNBA. Every sponsor meeting, commercial pitch, and broadcast highlight reel starts and ends with her image. She is more than just the league's most famous athlete. Its economy is powered by her. When she speaks, networks, brands, and fans listen. That's why her statement was so awful. For the first time, the league's most significant voice formally supported its highest authority. She didn't scream. She didn't level any charges. She didn't boast. She only said, calmly, that Nfisa was right and that leadership needed to get better. And that's more powerful than any angry outburst could ever be in the world of professional sports, where appearances are crucial. The answer arrived immediately. On social media, it was clear. The comment sections became very active. Headlines emerged in a matter of minutes. Caitlin Clark is in favor of Keir. Clark wants to be in charge. The face of the league adopts a position. Analysts debated whether or not she had just started a full-fledged power struggle within the WNBA. Since this wasn't just a player expressing an opinion, she had, without a doubt. The biggest star in the league was subtly setting a boundary by prioritizing players over management and honesty above public relations. Her tone made it much more captivating. Caitlin didn't feel anything. She wasn't snapping. She sounded like someone who had been observing, waiting, and thinking before coming to the conclusion that enough was enough. She spoke with control as well as conviction. She didn't have to speak louder. She just needed to be explicit. Everyone heard the same thing in that clarity. This league needs to change. You can imagine the anxiety in the WNBA offices. Advisors are urgently attempting to present her comment as misconstrued, while PR teams are formulating responses. But there isn't a spin strong enough to undo what has happened. Because Caitlin Clark wasn't just an observer. She made up her mind. She had been the focal point of the league's promotion for months. Every advertisement, promo, and billboard featured her image. She was the brand. But the same brand that they had built everything around was now questioning their public leadership. That is the kind of disruption that not only damages an organization's reputation, but also completely changes its trajectory. Here's the real irony. The WNBA had exploited her name to forward the story of progress and harmony. But when she eventually demanded accountability under that name, that story suddenly started to fall apart. Because despite the league's best efforts to pretend nothing was wrong, Caitlin Clark had just disclosed what everyone in the league already knew, that there was a major issue at the top. She didn't speak in a dramatic manner. They didn't have to be. They were measured, rooted, and inevitable. They were extremely dangerous because of this. Because when the face of your league starts to imply that leadership is failing, you cannot PR your way out of the situation. That one time was crucial. The quiet explosion that changed the WNBA forever. What came next made it clear that the damage was already well beyond the locker room. The moment Caitlin Clark's comments were made public, everything changed. It was more than just a quote now. It was a sign. In just a few minutes, the video went viral, creating the sense that something significant is happening and there is no turning back. Incredulous remarks were made. Suddenly, fans who had never agreed on anything, favoritism, birds, or even Caitlin herself, came to a consensus. Instead of happiness, they were bound together by frustration. When the most popular women's basketball player says the league needs great leadership, you don't need a translation. Everyone knew who she was talking about. At that point, the real shift in power began. At WNBA headquarters, panic broke out. Executives called emergency meetings. PR departments scrambled to update talking points. Inquiring about the issue, the sponsorship liaison started taking nervous calls from brands. However, nothing could stop the tide. Because when Caitlin Clark spoke, the tale was no longer part of the league. It belonged to the people. Social media turned into a battlefield. Fans started looking for earlier footage of questionable refereeing, deaf news conferences, and situations where players voiced concerns that were turned down. Memes abounded on the internet, with some mocking the commissioner and others endorsing the players. One highly popular tweet effectively summed it up. You can't build your entire brand around Caitlin Clark and then act surprised when she takes the initiative. That tweet received 1 million views in less than a day. As this was going on, players from all over the league were keeping a close eye on it. Rather than avoiding the issue, they started sharing and making similar comments. Clearly, softly, and silently. It wasn't a revolt in the conventional sense. It was a more strategic, unified awareness that was calmer. Players have been told for years to be patient because progress takes time and to be grateful for visibility. However, one of their own had shown them what true leverage looks like. Caitlin Clark wasn't shouting or demanding. She was just refusing to play the PR game anymore, and that nonviolent protest was more powerful than any statement or boycott. It's easy to forget what that moment meant, but in order to fully understand it, you must comprehend the hierarchy of professional sports. The league's reputation is its foundation, and the commissioner sets the tone, which the players are likely to follow. However, the roles changed in that moment. Leadership was no longer effective with the players. The leadership was responding to them. Cathy Engelbert had been the WNBA spokesperson for growth for many years, encouraging sponsorships, viewership, and achievement. However, her reputation quickly collapsed as the criticism grew. Fans started sharing video of her denial during the press conference alongside Caitlin's composed comment, creating a stark contrast. One woman was spinning, while another was just stating the truth. It was all stated in the remarks. One has a commanding voice. The other seemed to be losing her composure. And that's exactly what was happening. There was a loss of control. The commissioner was free to refute, explain, or avoid. However, it was no longer relevant. Because Caitlin Clark had recently asserted that perception is power in the era of social media, the story had spread beyond her. However, popular hashtags and tweets weren't the only factors. The ripple effects were much more catastrophic behind the scenes. Sponsors started discreetly contacting league representatives to inquire about if they should halt scheduled commercials until things settle down. Think pieces titled, Caitlin Clark and the WNBA's Leadership Dilemma, were written by media outlets that had reported favorably on the WNBA's expansion. For the first time in many years, the league was being burnt by the spotlight that had formerly helped it grow. Additionally, Caitlin Clark didn't post a single follow-up during all of this chaos. Nothing, no justifications, no retractions. She was not required to. More than any words could possibly say, her silence said. The world was responding on her behalf once she had spoken her mind. At that moment, an incredible occurrence happened. The same admirers who had denounced her began to stand up for her. People started claiming she was the only one speaking the truth after accusing her of being overhyped. Overnight, the public's perception of Caitlin Clark changed from one of a controversial figure to one of a reluctant truth-teller. The league, on the other hand, could not equal it. Because every press release you produce seems hollow when your star becomes the moral focal point of the narrative. Behind closed doors, sources began to whisper that the player's relationship with league leadership had at its lowest point in years. It appears that some players chose not to show up for Engelbert's arranged meetings. Instead of asking for justifications, union representatives were looking for accountability. There was no longer a scandal involving the WNBA. There was an uprising against it. The most ironic thing is that neither a boycott nor a protest started it. A player who had spent months doing everything correctly launched it with a single, composed sentence. Caitlin Clark refrained from yelling. She didn't level any charges. She made no threats. All she did was speak the truth, and the truth took care of the rest. But this shift in power wasn't the end of the narrative. It was the beginning of something far more important. Something that might determine whether the WNBA achieves its long-held goals or collapses under its own weight. Because every decision made by the league, every statement made by the commissioner, and every subsequent decision will now be evaluated in relation to a single question. Was Caitlin Clark referring to this type of leadership? The effects we've just seen are only the beginning if the response is unfavorable. Drama isn't the only thing